Jacob confides in Julia. This mine has over $20 million in gold, which in today's dollars would be around 700 million.
25 unusual things that took place in the Wild Wild West. The Wild West wasn't just about gunfights and outlaws, it was a place of strange experiments, eerie disappearances, and unexpected twists. From camels in the desert to vanishing miners, the untamed frontier held secrets that continue to baffle and amaze. Ready to explore some of the most unusual events that shaped the legend of the Wild West. Number 1. The Camel Corps Experiment. In 1855, the US Army had an unusual idea: camels. They figured these animals would thrive in the hot, dry Southwest, where horses and mules often struggled. So they imported camels from the Middle East, along with handlers who knew how to manage them. Thus, the Camel Corps was born. The camels were perfect for hauling heavy loads across the arid landscapes. They could carry more weight and survive on less water than traditional pack animals. For a while, it seemed like the army had found a genius solution to their desert transportation problems. But there was a catch. Soldiers weren't thrilled about working with camels. Horses and camels didn't exactly get along, and the soldiers themselves didn't have the patience for these stubborn, odd-looking creatures. As the Civil War broke out, the army's priorities shifted, and the Camel Corps fell by the wayside. By the late 1860s, the camels were either sold off or set free, left to roam the deserts of the Southwest. People reported seeing wild camels for years afterward, and a few even became part of local legends. While the Camel Corps never took off, it remains one of the strangest military experiments in US history. Number 2. The Dead Man's Hand. August 2, 1876 started like any other day for Wild Bill Hickok. The legendary gunslinger walked into Nuttall and Mann's saloon in Deadwood, South Dakota, and sat down for a friendly game of poker. Hickok had been known for his sharp shooting and quicker-than-lightning reflexes, but even the fastest hands couldn't save him that day. Hickok usually preferred to sit with his back to the wall, but on that fateful day, all the seats he liked were taken. Reluctantly, he sat with his back to the door. Midway through the poker game, a young man named Jack McCall entered the saloon, walked up behind Hickok, and shot him in the head at point-blank range. Hickok died instantly, still holding his cards, 2 pairs, aces and eights. This hand of cards soon became known as the Dead Man's Hand and was etched into the lore of the Wild West. Some say Hickok had been winning big before his murder, while others believe the opposite, suggesting McCall's attack was fueled by a personal grudge or gambling debts. McCall was captured and tried for the murder, but the first trial was chaotic and he was acquitted. A second trial found him guilty and he was eventually hanged. As for the Dead Man's Hand, it lives on as a symbol of bad luck, a final, eerie moment in the life of one of the West's most iconic figures. Number 3. The Great Diamond Hoax of 1872. The Wild West wasn't just about shootouts and cattle drives, it was also a place of wild schemes, and none were quite as audacious as the Great Diamond Hoax of 1872. 2 cunning prospectors, Philip Arnold and John Slack, convinced investors in New York and San Francisco that they had discovered a massive diamond deposit in the remote areas of Colorado. This was an era when everyone was looking to strike it rich, and gold and silver were the main draws. But diamonds, that was a whole new level of excitement. Arnold and Slack brought samples of diamonds and other gems to the cities, causing a frenzy among eager investors. The stones appeared legitimate, and the men even took some of their wealthiest potential backers to the supposed site of the mine. There, they salted the ground, planting gems they had imported from Europe and Brazil, so the investors would believe the land was rich with untapped riches. Word spread quickly, and soon enough people were pouring money into the venture, hoping to cash in on the find of a lifetime. The swindlers managed to pull the wool over everyone's eyes, including some of the most respected financial figures of the time. The Wild West wasn't just about gunfights and outlaws. It was a place of strange experiments, eerie disappearances, and unexpected twists. From camels in the desert to vanishing miners, the untamed frontier held secrets that continue to baffle and amaze. Ready to explore some of the most unusual events that shaped the legend of the Wild West. Number 4. The Johnson County War. The Johnson County War, a bloody conflict in Wyoming during the spring of 1892, was essentially a battle between the rich and the struggling. On one side, you had powerful cattle barons, the wealthy ranchers who controlled massive herds and acres of land. On the other, small-time ranchers and farmers, often referred to as rustlers, who were accused of stealing cattle to survive. The tension had been simmering for years. The large cattle companies felt their dominance was being threatened by these smaller ranchers, who were moving onto public lands, fencing off water sources, and in some cases, suspected of rustling. In response, the barons formed the Wyoming Stock Growers Association, a powerful group that essentially ran the region. They hired their own private army of gunmen to take matters into their own hands. In April 1892, the situation exploded. The cattle barons hired around 50 armed men and set out to eliminate those they considered rustlers, targeting small ranchers they believed to be cattle thieves. Their mission led them to Johnson County, where gunfights and ambushes took place over several days. One of the most notorious incidents involved the siege of the TA Ranch, where the cattlemen's hired guns were surrounded by a posse of local ranchers and townspeople. The situation only calmed when the U.S. cavalry intervened, putting an end to the violence. However, no one was ever convicted for the killings, as the cattle barons were too powerful to be held accountable. The Johnson County War highlighted the deep divide between the wealthy elite and the working-class ranchers in the Old West. It wasn't just about cattle, it was about control of land, power, and the future of the West itself. The conflict left a lasting mark on Wyoming's history and remains one of the most infamous range wars of the Wild West. Number 5. Belle Starr, Bandit Queen. Belle Starr, one of the Wild West's most notorious female outlaws, earned the nickname the Bandit Queen for her bold crimes and connections to infamous outlaws like Jesse James and the Younger Brothers. Born Myra Maybelle Shirley in 1848, Belle didn't start out as a criminal, but life on the frontier had its way of turning people to the wrong side of the law. She was known for her skills as a horse thief and her involvement in stagecoach robberies, often riding alongside her outlaw associates. But what made Belle stand out wasn't just her crimes. It was her defiant, larger-than-life persona. Dressed in flashy clothes, often carrying pistols on her hips, Belle was every bit the Wild West legend. She was fiercely independent, a woman who lived life on her own terms in a world dominated by men. Her life, however, was as tragic as it was thrilling. In 1889, at the age of 40, Belle was mysteriously shot and killed near her home in Oklahoma Territory. Some suspected it was an act of revenge from a former lover, while others believed it might have been a rival outlaw or even her own son. Belle Starr's story is one of the Wild West's most enduring legends. A woman who carved out her own path, defied convention, and lived a life filled with danger, adventure, and mystery. Her outlaw legacy still fascinates those who read about her daring exploits in a time when the Wild West was at its most untamed. Number 6. The Great Train Robbery of 1883. Train robberies were a staple of Wild West crime, but the Great Train Robbery of 1883 in Colorado was one for the books. A group of outlaws, including some seasoned criminals, planned to intercept a stagecoach carrying gold near Grand Junction, Colorado. The gold was meant to fund a mining operation, and the thieves were sure it was an easy score. Everything seemed perfect on paper. The robbers meticulously mapped out their heist, scouted the area, and timed their attack down to the minute. However, as with many great plans, things started to fall apart once it was set in motion. On the day of the robbery, the outlaws made their move, but a series of missteps and bad luck threw their plan into chaos. First, they underestimated the resilience of the stagecoach driver, who put up fierce resistance, slowing them down and giving nearby law enforcement time to react. To make matters worse, the robbers' coordination broke down, causing confusion among their ranks. Instead of a quick grab and go, the heist turned into a drawn-out fiasco. Several of the gang members were captured after the failed robbery, and the stolen gold was recovered. The Great Train Robbery became a cautionary tale, reminding outlaws that even the best-laid plans can crumble under pressure. Despite their failure, the incident added to the mythology of the Wild West, where larger-than-life crimes and near escapes were common. And while the robbers didn't escape with their loot, they did secure a place in the annals of Western history. Number 7. The Legend of the Lost Dutchman's Gold Mine. The Lost Dutchman's gold mine is one of the most enduring mysteries of the Wild West. Said to be hidden deep within Arizona's Superstition Mountains, the mine has captivated treasure hunters for over a century. The tale begins in the late 1800s with a German immigrant named Jacob Waltz, dubbed the Dutchman due to a common misunderstanding of his nationality. Waltz supposedly discovered a massive gold deposit while wandering the rugged terrain of the Superstition Mountains. The location of the mine was a closely guarded secret, and Waltz only revealed hints about it to a few trusted individuals. According to legend, before his death in 1891, he gave a detailed but cryptic map to a woman who had cared for him in his final days, suggesting the fortune was hers if she could find it. Despite countless attempts, the Lost Dutchman's mine has never been definitively located, fueling speculation about its existence. Some believe the treasure is real, hidden away in a maze of canyons and cliffs waiting to be found. Others think the story is nothing more than a myth, one of many fanciful tales spun during the gold rush days. Over the years, many treasure hunters have tried and failed to locate the mine. Some have met tragic ends, getting lost or succumbing to the harsh desert conditions. Their disappearances have only added to the mystery, with locals believing the mountain itself is cursed or protected by the spirits of those who perished seeking the mine. The legend of the Lost Dutchman's gold mine continues to thrive today. Whether fact or fiction, the story speaks to the Wild West's allure, where fortune could be made or lost in the blink of an eye, and where mystery lurked behind every rock. Adventurers still venture into the Superstition Mountains, guided by maps, rumors, and sheer hope, in search of the gold that may never be found. Is the treasure real, or is it just another wild tale of the Old West? The truth remains buried, just like the gold itself, if it ever existed at all. Number 8. The Lincoln County War. The Lincoln County War, fought from 1878 to 1881 in New Mexico, was one of the Wild West's most violent and infamous conflicts. It all began as a power struggle over control of the economy in Lincoln County, with two rival factions vying for dominance. On one side was Lawrence Murphy and his partners, a group of businessmen who ran a monopoly on supplies in the area. They controlled everything from beef to dry goods, leaving little room for competition. In opposition stood John Tunstall, an Englishman who arrived in Lincoln County in 1876 with ambitions of breaking Murphy's stranglehold on local commerce. Tunstall, along with his business partner Alexander McSween, opened a rival store, sparking tension. Things quickly escalated. In 1878, Tunstall was murdered by men loyal to Murphy's faction, which ignited a full-blown war. Tunstall's death didn't just anger his allies, it also enraged Billy the Kid, a young outlaw who worked for Tunstall. Billy swore revenge, and thus the Lincoln County War became a personal battle for him. The next few years were marked by gunfights, ambushes, and assassinations. Billy the Kid and his gang, known as the Regulators, clashed with Murphy's men in a series of bloody skirmishes. Both sides sought control of Lincoln County through violence, with no regard for law or order. The war reached its peak in 1881 when Billy the Kid was captured and later killed by Sheriff Pat Garrett, effectively ending the conflict. However, the violence had already left its mark on the region. The Lincoln County War is remembered today not only for its brutality, but for the rise of Billy the Kid as a Western legend. It serves as a reminder of how greed and ambition could ignite violence in the Wild West. Number 9. The Murder of Jesse James. The murder of Jesse James, one of the most infamous outlaws in American history, was as shocking as it was tragic. Jesse had spent years robbing banks, trains, and stagecoaches with his gang, becoming a legend in his own right. But in 1882, his life came to a sudden and unexpected end, not in a hail of gunfire, but by betrayal. Jesse had grown weary of his life on the run and had been living under an assumed name in Missouri with his wife and children. He trusted his gang, particularly Robert Ford, who had been riding with him for some time. What Jesse didn't know was that Ford had secretly struck a deal with Missouri's governor, Thomas Crittenden. The deal Ford would bring down Jesse in exchange for a hefty reward and a full pardon. On April 3, 1882, Jesse James was at home, standing on a chair to adjust a picture on the wall. While his back was turned, Robert Ford drew his gun and shot Jesse in the back of the head, killing him instantly. Ford thought the act would make him a hero, but instead, he was viewed as a coward and a traitor. Jesse's death stunned the country, and Ford's betrayal sparked widespread outrage. The murder of Jesse James is remembered as one of the most infamous betrayals in American history. It highlights the complicated nature of loyalty, fame, and justice in the Wild West, where even the most notorious outlaws could be brought down by those closest to them. Jesse may have lived outside the law, but his tragic end turned him into a martyr in the eyes of many, and his legend only grew after his death. Number 10. The ghost town of Bodie, California. Bodie, California is one of the most famous ghost towns in the American West, and for good reason. What was once a bustling gold mining town in the late 1800s is now a desolate and eerie reminder of the boom and bust nature of frontier life. Founded in 1859, Bodie quickly became a wild and rowdy place. At its peak, the town had a population of around 10,000 people, all hoping to strike it rich in the surrounding hills. Gold was discovered in the area, and the town sprung up virtually overnight. For a while, it was a typical Wild West boomtown filled with saloons, brothels, and rowdy miners. The town had more than 65 saloons at one point, earning it the reputation of being a rough place where fights and shootouts were common. But like many frontier towns, Bodie's prosperity didn't last. By the early 1900s, gold began to run out, and the miners who once flocked to the area slowly left for new opportunities. A devastating fire in 1932 destroyed most of the remaining structures, and by the end of World War II, Bodie was effectively abandoned. Today, the remains of Bodie sit frozen in time. Visitors to the ghost town today report strange occurrences that suggest Bodie's past may not be as dead as it seems. People have reported seeing figures in the windows of old buildings, hearing footsteps echoing in the empty streets, and even sensing a strange feeling of being watched. Some say the spirits of the miners who once lived and died there still haunt the town, unable to leave. The eeriness of Bodie is compounded by its state of preservation. The town remains relatively untouched, and the dilapidated buildings are just as they were when the last residents packed up and left. Bodie is a true ghost town, its silence and haunting history drawing curious visitors from all over. Perhaps it's the lingering spirits, or maybe it's the reminders of the fleeting nature of fortune in the Wild West, but Bodie continues to fascinate. Number 11. Doc Holliday's Last Stand. Doc Holliday, the infamous gunslinger, gambler, and occasional dentist, is one of the most legendary figures of the Wild West. Known for his role in the famous gunfight at the OK Corral, Holliday's reputation as a deadly shot and fearless fighter earned him a place in Western lore. But his final moments were as much about illness as they were about gunfighting. Holliday had been battling tuberculosis for most of his life, a disease that he tried to mask with his bravado. Time he reached Colorado in 1887, his health had seriously deteriorated and he was slowly wasting away. Holliday's last stand didn't involve a high-noon shootout or a legendary duel. Instead, it was a quieter end to a tumultuous life. On November 8, 1887, Doc Holliday died in a Denver boarding house. He was just 36 years old. Despite his illness, he faced death with the same indifference he had faced many of his foes. His death was largely overshadowed by the larger-than-life legends that had already sprung up around him. Holliday's death only cemented his place in Western mythology, as he left behind a legacy of fast gunfights, wild stories, and the unshakable image of a man who lived life by his own rules. Though he died in relative obscurity, Doc Holliday became a symbol of the tough, fearless frontier spirit that defined the Wild West. Number 12. The Pecos War. The Pecos War, which occurred in the late 1870s and early 1880s in Texas, was one of the lesser-known conflicts of the Wild West, but it was every bit as violent and brutal as its more famous counterparts. It was a range war, fought over grazing land between cattle ranchers and sheep herders, and it left a trail of bloodshed and destruction. Cattle ranchers and sheep herders had long been in conflict in Texas, but tensions escalated in the 1870s. As more settlers and livestock owners moved into the Pecos Valley region, competition over land and resources grew intense. Cattlemen were particularly hostile to sheep herders, viewing them as a threat to their grazing lands. The sheep were said to overgraze the land, making it impossible for cattle to thrive. The war started in earnest in 1876 when a group of cattlemen, fed up with the invasion of sheep, began attacking herders. Several skirmishes ensued, and over the course of the next few years, the violence escalated. Ranchers would raid sheep camps, slaughter the livestock, and sometimes even kill the herders. The sheep herders, in turn, retaliated with violence. The conflict reached its height in 1883 when a group of cattlemen ambushed and killed a group of sheep herders, leading to the intervention of the Texas Rangers. The war eventually fizzled out in 1884, but it marked the end of an era for sheep herding in Texas. The Pecos War serves as a reminder of the fierce competition that defined the Wild West, as well as the volatility of life on the frontier, where disputes over land and livestock could quickly spiral into deadly confrontations. Number 13. Black Bart, the poet outlaw. In the late 19th century, stagecoach robberies were a common occurrence in the Wild West, but one outlaw stood out among the many: Charles Earl Bowles, better known as Black Bart. His reputation was not just built on his daring heists, but also on his unique habit of leaving behind rhymed notes at the scenes of his crimes. These poetic messages earned him the nickname the Poet Outlaw. Black Bart's crimes were carried out with precision and sophistication. He targeted stagecoaches in Northern California and Southern Oregon between 1875 and 1883. Unlike many other outlaws, Bart wasn't interested in the violent shootouts or confrontations that often marked robberies in the Wild West. Instead, he preferred to use his wits and often robbed his victims without firing a single shot. Dressed in a long coat, mask, and a bowler hat, he struck fear into those who traveled the dusty trails. After a successful heist, Bart would leave behind a poem written on a scrap of paper, taunting law enforcement and the victims. These notes were his signature and were often humorous in tone. For example, in one of his famous poems, he addressed his victims with the line, "Here I lay me down to sleep, to steal a little gold, not to keep." It was this mix of humor and menace that made him both feared and respected. His robberies became legendary, and even though he managed to escape capture for years, the law eventually caught up with him. In 1883, Bart was tracked down and captured by a detective named Elam. In a surprising twist, Black Bart's capture was not due to his crimes, but because he left behind a crucial piece of evidence: his handwriting. Though he served time in prison, Black Bart's myth endured, and his rhyming notes have made him one of the most memorable outlaws in Wild West history. Number 14. Judge Isaac Parker, the Hanging Judge. Isaac Parker, known as the Hanging Judge, became one of the most infamous legal figures in the Wild West, and for good reason. He presided over the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Arkansas from 1875 until 1896. During his time in office, Parker's court was one of the most important in the country, dealing with the legal challenges and rough-and-tumble criminals of frontier life. His jurisdiction covered an area that included the Indian Territory, which was considered lawless and unruly, and his court was tasked with restoring order to this wild frontier. Parker's reputation as the hanging judge stemmed from his firm stance on justice, especially when it came to the numerous criminals that passed through his court. In his 21 years on the bench, he sentenced over 160 men to death, many of whom were executed by hanging. The sheer number of hangings made Parker a feared figure in the West, but his tough decisions were often considered necessary in a region that was often devoid of proper law enforcement. The people who came before Parker's court were a rough crowd, ranging from cattle rustlers to outlaws, and even Native American warriors accused of violent crimes. While many saw Parker as a hard-nosed enforcer of justice, others criticized him for being too harsh, particularly when it came to capital punishment. Parker himself was aware of his reputation, but often expressed that his actions were justified by the need to restore order and curb crime in a dangerous and lawless land. Though his role in enforcing the law was widely acknowledged, Parker's court was not without controversy. Critics argue that his strict justice contributed to the dark, often unforgiving reputation of the Wild West. Nevertheless, the legacy of Isaac Parker as a symbol of frontier justice remains cemented in history. Number 15. The Silver Panic of 1893. The Silver Panic of 1893 was one of the most significant economic downturns in the Wild West and marked a turning point in the region's economic development. The panic was driven by a sudden collapse in the silver market, which had a profound impact on the mining towns that had sprung up during the Silver Rush. During the late 1800s, silver mining was a major source of income and prosperity in many western states, especially in Colorado, Nevada, and the Dakotas. Miners, speculators, and investors had been pouring money into silver mining operations, hoping to strike it rich. But in 1893, the bottom dropped out of the market. Prices for silver plummeted, causing the value of silver-based currency to drop as well. This sudden collapse led to widespread panic and chaos. Mining towns that had once been thriving with bustling saloons, hotels, and shops quickly turned into ghost towns as many mines shut down. Unemployment surged as miners lost their jobs, and many families were left destitute. Business owners in mining towns went bankrupt, and the ripple effects were felt throughout the region. As one mine after another closed, people who had come to the West in search of wealth were left with nothing. The panic also hit investors hard, as many had sunk their life savings into silver mining ventures. This financial catastrophe contributed to a wave of disillusionment with the West as a land of limitless opportunity, leaving many to question the sustainability of the boom and bust economy that had defined the region. Ultimately, the Silver Panic of 1893 is remembered as one of the harsh realities of frontier life, where the fleeting nature of fortune and the unpredictability of the economy were constant threats to survival and prosperity. Number 16. The Great Boulder Fire of 1887. In the early years of Colorado's boom, the town of Boulder was a symbol of prosperity and hope in the Wild West. But in 1887, that hope was suddenly turned to ash when a catastrophic fire swept through the town, destroying much of its infrastructure and changing the community forever. It was a summer evening in 1887 when the fire broke out, and nobody knows for sure what sparked it. Some say it was a stray spark from a chimney, others suggest it was an act of arson. Whatever the cause, the fire spread quickly, fueled by the dry conditions and wooden structures that made up much of Boulder's buildings at the time. The fire was so intense that it destroyed an estimated 20 city blocks, reducing homes, businesses, and public buildings to nothing more than charred remains. Boulder's main street, known for its lively shops and saloons, was leveled. At the time, Boulder was home to over 3,000 residents, and the destruction left many homeless. The town's main economic assets were wiped out in a matter of hours. Fortunately, there were no reported deaths, but the damage to the town's infrastructure was staggering. The fire sparked myths and rumors, with locals speculating on its cause for decades. Some whispered about the possibility of foul play or a curse on the town. Others believed it was a warning about the fragility of human settlements in the unforgiving frontier. In the aftermath, the town began to rebuild, but it was never quite the same. The fire not only marked the end of Boulder's early boom days, but also served as a harsh reminder of how unpredictable and dangerous life in the Wild West could be. Even in a place as seemingly stable as Boulder, disaster could strike at any time. Number 17. The Vanishing Miners of Nevada. Nevada, known for its silver mining boom in the 19th century, was home to bustling mining camps and towns. It was a land of fortune and peril where riches could be found in the earth or death in the shadows. But during the late 1800s, something eerie was happening in the Nevada mining camps. Miners were disappearing seemingly without a trace. Between 1870 and 1890, multiple reports surfaced about miners vanishing from camps under mysterious circumstances. The townspeople were left perplexed, and speculation began to run wild. Was it the result of natural dangers such as cave-ins or accidents in the mines? Or did more sinister forces play a role, like hostile Native American groups, outlaws, or even supernatural causes? The disappearances were particularly concentrated around the remote mining camps of Nevada, such as the town of Tonopah, where many miners came to stake their claim. Miners who had been working together for years would suddenly disappear overnight, with no sign of a struggle or any clues to their whereabouts. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. Rumors abounded. Some suggested that the disappearances were the result of disputes between rival mining companies who may have used violence to eliminate competitors. Others believed Native American raids were to blame. In an era when tensions between settlers and Native American tribes were high, it wouldn't have been surprising if attacks were a factor. But many residents remain convinced that something more mysterious was at play, perhaps a curse placed on the miners by ancient tribal spirits or a ghostly force connected to the mines themselves. While the true reasons behind these disappearances are still debated, what remains clear is that Nevada's Wild West days were filled with danger and intrigue. Whether through human conflict or natural disasters, these vanishing miners remain an unsolved mystery of the frontier era. Number 18. The Shoshone Massacre. One of the darkest chapters in the history of the Wild West was the Shoshone Massacre, which occurred in 1863. The massacre is a tragic reminder of the deep conflicts between settlers and Native American tribes during the expansion of the United States into the Western Territories. The Shoshone people indigenous to the western United States had long lived in harmony with the land in what is now Utah, Idaho, and Nevada. However, the westward movement of settlers, along with the influx of miners and ranchers, brought intense pressure to the Shoshone and other Native American tribes. This culminated in a tragic and bloody event known as the Shoshone Massacre. In the spring of 1863, tensions between the Shoshone and settlers reached a boiling point. The Shoshone had been accused of raiding settlers' camps and livestock as they struggled to maintain their way of life amidst increasing encroachment. After one such incident, a group of settlers and soldiers decided to retaliate, seeking revenge for the losses suffered during these raids. They set out to find the Shoshone tribe, and on their way clashed with them in what would become a bloodbath. The group of soldiers and settlers, armed with rifles and artillery, ambushed a group of Shoshone camped along Bear River in Idaho. Despite the fact that the Shoshone were not prepared for a full-on assault and many were women and children, the massacre resulted in the deaths of over 300 Shoshone people, including warriors, women, and children. It is said to be one of the deadliest massacres of Native Americans by settlers in the history of the West. The massacre was a devastating blow to the Shoshone, leading to a breakdown of their power and further displacement. For the settlers, it was an example of the brutal violence that was becoming all too common in the Wild West. The massacre remains an enduring symbol of the violence and suffering faced by Native American tribes during the expansion of the U.S. into the Western Territories. Number 19. Calamity Jane's eccentric life. Martha Jane Canary, better known as Calamity Jane, was one of the most eccentric and colorful figures of the American Wild West. Born in 1852, she grew up in Missouri but soon found herself drawn to the frontier, a land known for its rough-and-tumble inhabitants and daring adventurers. Her life became a mix of legendary exploits and chaotic misadventures, blending truth with myth. Known for her wild behavior, Calamity Jane was an accomplished rider, sharpshooter, and notorious figure in the American West. She often dressed as a man and claimed to have worked as a scout for the military. Although there's little evidence to back up this claim, she became famous for her role in the gold rushes and was often seen in the company of Wild West icons such as Wild Bill Hickok, with whom she claimed to have had a romantic relationship. However, much of what is known about Calamity Jane's life is filtered through the lens of tall tales and exaggerations. Calamity Jane's eccentric personality made her a fascinating figure, but she was also troubled. She had a reputation for heavy drinking and erratic behavior, often turning up at saloons or in towns unannounced. Yet despite her wild nature, she also had a reputation for being kind-hearted. She was known to help care for the sick and destitute in mining towns, and her compassion stood in contrast to her often rough appearance and behavior. Her most famous claim was her self-proclaimed role as an expert sharpshooter, even boasting of saving the lives of soldiers and civilians alike during her time as a scout. Her colorful life eventually led to fame in dime novels and Wild West shows, cementing her place in the mythology of the American frontier. Despite the myths and the contradictions, Calamity Jane remains an enduring symbol of the frontier spirit. Number 20. Annie Oakley's sharpshooting feats. Annie Oakley, born Phoebe Ann Moses in 1860, was one of the most remarkable sharpshooters in American history. Her extraordinary skills with a rifle and pistol would earn her a place in Wild West folklore and transform her into a national icon, representing the American frontier spirit. Oakley's sharp shooting prowess was discovered at a young age when, at the age of 15, she won a shooting match against Frank Butler, a professional marksman who became her husband. The victory was just the beginning of what would become a legendary career. She became a star attraction in Buffalo Bill Cody's Wild West show, where she performed incredible feats of marksmanship, including shooting the ashes off a cigarette held in her husband's mouth or splitting a playing card in midair. Known for her accuracy, Oakley could shoot targets as small as a dime from impressive distances, and she often performed tricks that left audiences in awe. Her performances attracted widespread attention and elevated her status as one of the greatest female sharpshooters of her time. At the height of her fame, she was said to have earned more than $1,000 a week, a staggering sum in that era. Despite the fame, Oakley was not just a showwoman. She was a serious advocate for women's rights and the empowerment of women. She once said, "I can do anything that any man can do, and I can do it better." And she used her platform to promote her belief in women's equality and self-reliance. Annie Oakley's talents went beyond marksmanship. She was a symbol of grace and strength in the face of adversity, representing the independent spirit of the American West. Number 21. The Stone Ships of Utah. In the remote deserts of Utah near the shores of the Great Salt Lake lies some of the most mysterious ancient formations in the American West. These formations, known as the Stone Ships, have puzzled archaeologists and historians for centuries. Rows of large upright stones form patterns that resemble ships, or in some cases, giant serpent-like shapes etched into the landscape. The stone ships are believed to have been created by an ancient culture, but their exact origins remain a mystery. Some believe these formations were created by Native American tribes, possibly the Anasazi or Fremont cultures who lived in the region long before European settlers arrived. Other theories suggest that these formations might have been constructed by early explorers, settlers, or even lost civilizations that vanished in the harsh desert environment. One popular theory is that the stone ships were used for ceremonial purposes, possibly as part of an ancient religious or navigational system. The alignment of the stones, particularly in relation to the sun and stars, suggests a connection to celestial observation, which is a common practice among many Native American cultures. The idea that these stone ships may have served as calendars or navigation aids raises intriguing questions about the advanced knowledge of ancient peoples in the region. The significance of the stone ships remains speculative, as no definitive archaeological evidence has been found to explain their exact purpose. However, they are an example of the enigmatic and mysterious artifacts left behind by ancient cultures in the American West. Some believe that the stone ships may have held spiritual or ritualistic importance, a tangible link between the people of the past and the natural world they lived in. Today, these formations remain a fascinating relic of the past, an enduring reminder of the ancient civilizations that once inhabited the vast and rugged landscapes of Utah. Despite the theories and speculation, the true story of the stone ships continues to elude discovery, making them a continuing puzzle for modern researchers. Number 22. The railroad workers' disappearances. During the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad in the late 19th century, workers who toiled in the vast untamed wilderness of the American West often vanished under mysterious circumstances. These disappearances, which occurred primarily in remote and desolate areas, have become part of the folklore surrounding the railroad's history. The workers, many of whom were Chinese immigrants, faced not only grueling labor but also dangerous conditions, threats from nature, hostile terrain, and even potential violence from outlaw bands or Native American groups who were displaced by the railroad. In some cases, railroad workers were said to have vanished without a trace. Rumors spread that entire work camps disappeared overnight with no sign of struggle, leaving behind empty tents and abandoned tools. Some suggested that these workers had fallen prey to the harsh natural elements, such as blizzards or floods, which frequently battered railroad construction camps in the Sierra Nevada and Rocky Mountains. Others speculated that foul play was involved, either from bandits or enraged Native American tribes fighting to defend their land from the advancing railroad. The mystery deepened with stories of ghostly sightings and strange happenings in the areas where the workers vanished. Some claimed that the spirits of these lost men still roamed the tracks, seeking revenge for their untimely demise. Railroad tracks themselves in some areas were said to be cursed, with unexplained accidents and disappearances continuing long after the railroads were completed. This blend of historical fact and local legend added to the eerie atmosphere of the railroad's construction. While the true cause of these disappearances remains unclear, the legend of the lost railroad workers serves as a chilling reminder of the dangers and hardships faced by those who built the railway that ultimately transformed the American West. Number 23, The Curse of the Lost Wagon Train. The Lost Wagon Train is one of the most enduring legends of the American frontier, shrouded in mystery and speculation. In the late 1800s, a wagon train full of pioneers set out from Missouri bound for the fertile lands of California. The journey was perilous, and despite the hope of prosperity, the travelers were doomed by a series of tragic misfortunes. The wagon train, which was traveling along the rugged Oregon Trail, became lost in the unforgiving wilderness of the Sierra Nevada mountains. Supplies dwindled and food ran low as the settlers struggled to navigate the treacherous terrain. Within days, sickness began to spread through the group, and the pioneers were soon caught in a desperate battle for survival. Rumors circulated that the wagon train had been cursed, that something supernatural had claimed its travelers. This belief was reinforced by the sudden appearance of strange symbols carved into the rocks along their path and eerie sounds that echoed through the night. After months of fruitless searching, the wagon train was never found, and its whereabouts became one of the greatest mysteries of the American West. Many believed that the lost travelers had perished in the wilderness, their bodies swallowed by the mountains, while others suggested that they had fallen victim to bandits or hostile Native American tribes. Some speculated that the curse had indeed taken hold, and that the wagon train had vanished into another dimension, or that the spirits of the lost pioneers were doomed to wander the wilderness forever. The legend of the lost wagon train lives on in the folklore of the region. Though many expeditions were launched to find the missing pioneers, none were successful, and the cursed wagon train became a symbol of the harsh, unforgiving frontier. Today, their fate remains one of the great unsolved mysteries of the American West. Number 24, The Mysterious Lights of Red Lake. In the remote expanses of Montana, the area around Red Lake has been home to one of the West's most puzzling phenomena: mysterious lights that appear and vanish without explanation. Local residents and miners have reported sightings of these lights for decades, sparking curiosity and fear among those who encounter them. The lights often resemble glowing orbs or strange flashes darting through the sky or hovering above the ground, creating an eerie atmosphere in the otherwise quiet landscape. Some witnesses describe the lights as a bright white or bluish hue, while others claim to have seen them in various colors, including red and green. They are often spotted in the evening or at night, flickering and dancing as if they possess a will of their own. With no clear source, the phenomenon has led to numerous theories, ranging from the scientifically grounded to the downright bizarre. Skeptics suggest that the lights could be explained by natural occurrences such as swamp gas igniting or atmospheric phenomena like ball lightning. However, these explanations fall short for many who have witnessed the lights firsthand. Some locals believe the lights are the spirits of miners lost in the nearby hills, forever wandering in search of their resting place. This ghostly theory has been further fueled by stories of tragic accidents and disappearances that have occurred in the area throughout its mining history. Intrigued treasure hunters and curious tourists have flocked to Red Lake, hoping to catch a glimpse of the elusive lights. While some return with tales of spectral encounters, others leave disappointed, having seen nothing but darkness. Despite modern advancements in science, the mystery of the Red Lake lights remains unresolved, adding another layer of intrigue to the enchanting lore of the Wild West. Number 25. The Enigmatic Life of Pearl Hart. In the rugged landscape of the Wild West, where lawlessness and adventure intertwined, Pearl Hart emerged as one of the few female outlaws to capture the public's imagination. Born in Ontario, Canada in 1871, Pearl defied the conventions of her time. She was more than just a bandit. She was a symbol of rebellion against societal norms. After moving to Arizona with her family, she soon found herself yearning for excitement and a life beyond domesticity. In 1899, Pearl became notorious for robbing a Wells Fargo stagecoach in Arizona, disguising herself as a man to carry out the heist. Armed with a revolver, she and her accomplice, a man named Joe Boot, successfully held up the stagecoach, making off with a modest sum of $400. The robbery, however, was just the beginning of her infamy. Pearl's daring act made headlines across the nation, and she quickly gained a reputation as a daring outlaw, earning her a place in the annals of Wild West folklore. But her notoriety was short-lived. Pearl was captured shortly after the robbery and faced trial. During her time in jail, she became somewhat of a celebrity, garnering attention for her audacious crime and outspoken nature. She claimed she had resorted to robbery out of desperation, having been abandoned by her husband. The media sensationalized her story, portraying her as a tragic figure caught in the harsh realities of life on the frontier. After serving a short sentence, Pearl Hart was eventually released from prison, but she struggled to find her place in a world that had changed while she was incarcerated. She later attempted to reform, giving speeches and advocating for women's rights, but the allure of her outlaw past always lingered. Pearl Hart's life is a testament to the complexity of identity in the Wild West. A woman who defied expectations, lived dangerously, and ultimately became a legend.